Thanks for joining us today on Mormonland, where we explore news in and about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm senior religion reporter Peggy Fletcher-Stack. I'm joined by managing editor David Noyce, who oversees our faith coverage. Hi, Dave.
Hello, Peggy.
We invite you, our listeners, to show your support for Mormonland by going to patreon.com, where with a donation as little as $3 a month, you can access all the Tribune's religion coverage, transcripts for our podcasts, and the Mormonland newsletter. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Mormonland. Now for today's episode. On the face of it, the blockbuster Barbie film seems like a light romp through gender-swapping universes. The first where women rule, Astronaut Barbie, Nobel Prize winner Barbie, President Barbie, in perfect harmony, and the second where men dominate. But some, including an author at Christianity Today, see it as a reverse allegory of the Christian Garden of Eden story, with Barbieland as the world untouched by human tragedy, but the heroine must commit original sin to travel to the real world to discover knowledge of good and evil. This telling echoes Mormon theology of a, quote, happy fall, in which Eve makes the right choice, even though she disobeys God and persuades Adam to follow her. Quote, in addition to introducing physical and spiritual death, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints explains, it gave us the opportunity to be born on the earth and to learn and progress. So what does the movie, which has attracted Latter-day Saints and millions of other theatergoers, have to say about women and men, the need for choices, the all-male priesthood, patriarchy, and perfectionism? Joining us via Zoom from Boston to discuss these questions is Rachel Ruckert, an award-winning author and editor-in-chief of Exponent 2, a magazine for and about Latter-day Saint women. Rachel, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, start off. Did you play with Barbies as a kid?
I sure did. My most memorable Christmas present was coming into the living room, and there was a pink Barbie dream house with a real battery-operated elevator, and it was wonderful. And it was interesting thinking about this, though, because that sparkle didn't quite last. I think even then I kind of understood and felt that Barbies were somehow embarrassing, like watching Barney. Like, they were not a cool toy. I was not raised in or steeped in a feminist world that would have kind of like the unreasonable expectations argument. This was just like, oh, they're lame. But I delighted in my Barbies. And I think looking back, I can also see that Barbies, I played with them very differently than how I played with other toys. I think for a lot of young people, Barbies gave me a chance to explore boundaries, relationships, and like wild imagination as my mind is like growing and maturing. Everything from how does kissing work to like, where is this Barbie riding off in her plastic horse into the horizon? And I think, speaking also to that piece that I think is real, like the unreasonable expectations. I'm also interested in this, like, this tendency of kids to play really hard on their Barbies sometimes, or like, the weird Barbie of like the torturing stuff. Leslie Jameson wrote a piece in the New Yorker called "Why Barbie Must Be Punished" in response to the new movie. And a line that really resonated with me too, as I think back on like, what was I doing with my Barbies? She said, I wanted to become Barbie and I wanted to destroy her. I wanted her perfection, but I also wanted to punish her for being more perfect than I'd ever be. So there's just a lot going on, and it definitely felt like a different toy than the other ones.
Did you have those career Barbies?
I had no career Barbies. I'm disappointed in that. No career Barbies. Yeah, maybe there was a vet at some point, but I'm pretty sure it was just the pretty dresses.
We had Astronaut Barbie. So what were your expectations going into the movie?
I was excited to see it mainly because anything that Greta Gerwig makes, I'm interested in seeing. But unless a friend hadn't explicitly invited me to go the day after its release, I'm not sure I would have gone to see it as promptly. And yeah, I was bowled over in a lot of ways. It definitely exceeded expectations, and I laughed harder than I have in a very long time.
So, Rachel, we'll probably dig into more of this a little later, but what were some of parts of the movie just that stood out to you right off the bat?
Yeah, and definitely excited, kind of for the long version of this story from all of us here. Off the bat, the things, just a first take that really stood out to me was just the poignancy of Depression Barbie. And like, sorry if that's a spoiler alert for some, Depression Barbie felt very real to me. I'm very fascinated in the role of Alan and how problematic gender roles can feel for certain folks in this kind of binary world that we have. And I think for me personally, too, there's a moment in the movie where Barbie is reflecting on something and she says, like, oh, I don't want to hurt him, like reflecting on, something that she has to like do or say to Ken after he's acted horribly. And another Barbie's like, he took your house. And just like proceeds to say, but I'm personally trying to recover from like people pleasing and like, oh, just don't hurt anyone. Just don't hurt anyone. And so on a personal level, those are some things that stood out, but I'm very interested in some of these like larger themes coming up.
Yeah. So Exponent 2 has published responses to the movie. Tell our listeners about some of them.
Yeah. So for those who are not familiar, Exponent 2 provides feminist forums for women and gender minorities across the Mormon spectrum to share their diverse life experiences in an atmosphere of trust and acceptance. So there are 3 pillars of Exponent. One is the annual retreat. One is the magazine, which I am the editor-in-chief of, and that was founded actually in 1974. So we're coming up on our 50th anniversary. It's a beautiful magazine. Highly recommend subscribing. But because it operates on a print schedule, they're more like evergreen topics. So where we're really seeing some of the most exciting Barbie content coming out is on the blog, which is the 3rd pillar of the organization. And so I just want to highlight 3 really interesting articles that have gone up in the last month. The first was by Heather Sondahl. Her essay is called Confessions of a Barbie Lover. And she talks about this, idea of, she's a feminist, so she should hate Barbie, but seeing her daughters playing through, the things that she also loved about Barbie and just not seeing Barbie as the Antichrist in stilettos that, maybe she should. And one thing that really stood out to me, especially, in light of this this podcast, she says, for every Ken doll, we had at least 4 Barbies. And no, never once did we play Brigham Young era Barbie, where Barbie, Midge, and Skipper were sister wives to polygamous Ken. On the contrary, Ken was an accessory, like her go-go boots. So Heather, is interested in this idea of imagination. Another post we got was from Abby Maxwell Hansen. Her post was called As a Latter-day Saint Woman, I Was Ken. And for her, at the age of 32, she puts into Google a big, scary question. Is patriarchy bad? And she cites some interesting personal experiences and also like that recent Instagram caption from the church after Patricia Holland died and how it did not mention her name. It just only mentioned her husband, Elder Holland. And so for her, this cognitive dissonance, and she says that while it would have infuriated me anywhere else to see this kind of, patriarchy basically play out, in high school, if they're like the councils of, who was going to be the homecoming queen or whatever were decided mainly by boys, that wouldn't have felt fair. But for her, she says, I didn't even question it in a church setting. And so that felt really poignant. And then a third one that I just want to draw attention to by Katie Ludlow Rich. I think this is just like a hilarious take. And I think one thing I'm interested in this movie generally is the power of humor and absurdity to speak to some really deep, painful issues. So her post was called, What Would General Conference Sound Like in Kendom? And I'm just going to read 2 quotes. Basically, she's taken some text from General Conference and she has inserted, instead of women, she's put Barbie, and instead of, men, she's put Ken. So here's the first one that's kind of fun. This one's from 1977. So a little bit dated, but I think we kind of have a tendency sometimes to not throw out the old and clarify. So here we go. I beg of you, you who could and should be bearing and rearing a family, Barbie, come home from the typewriter, the laundry, the nursing, come home from the factory, the cafe. No career approaches in importance in that of wife, homemaker, mother, cooking meals, washing dishes, making beds for one's precious Ken and children. Come home, Barbies, to your Kens. Make your mojo, dojo, casa house a heaven for them. Come home, Barbies, to your children, born and unborn. Wrap your motherly cloak around you and, unembarrassed, help a major role to create the bodies for immortal dolls who anxiously await. And so in that, it's hard not to even laugh. It's just this is absurd.
And how is that attributed, Rachel? She puts the attribution. She
does, yeah. So she says Ken Kimball, 1977. Right. Yeah. But I think one thing that's interesting, and Katie doesn't say this explicitly in her really great piece, but by the time we come around to 2014, we have a Ken Ballard quote. So we start to kind of see this shift where it's not as explicit of don't do those things, but we're seeing something else going on. So in this quote, we have, we cannot meet our destiny as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in preparing this world for the second coming of the Savior of the world without the support and faith and strength of the Barbies of this church. We need you. We need your voices. They need to be heard. They need to be heard in your community, in your neighborhoods. They need to be heard within the walls of ward council and on branch council. Now, don't talk too much in those council meetings. Just straighten the Kens out quickly and move the work on. We are building the kingdom of God. And so, I think for me, and I'm curious other people's thoughts too, but I think after seeing how powerful Barbie is, it's just it's a little bit patronizing in this particular lens of humor. That's what's going on in Exponent. We're having a great time, and we're always taking guest submissions, blog posts. If anyone's got more, keep them coming.
Okay, so let's move to the Garden of Eden hypothesis. So in the film, everything appears all's well in Barbieland until stereotypical Barbie, Margot Robbie, asks about death. She asks if anybody else has thoughts about death, which could be the first allusion to the Garden of Eden. Does that allegory seem plausible to you?
Absolutely. Though it's really obvious for me now, I have to say that while I was just watching the movie, and I saw it quite early before I'd read any commentary, I was just enjoying the movie and laughing and enjoying the ride. I wasn't really analyzing, but in hindsight, it's really hard to miss this allegory. In fact, Greta Gerwig herself mentions this even before the movie came out. She had an interview with Vogue, and she said Barbie was invented first. She said Ken was invented after Barbie to burnish Barbie's position in our eyes and in the world. That kind of creation myth is the opposite of the creation myth in Genesis. And thinking about her own background in Catholicism and stuff, I think this was very much top of mind, actually. Not, again, though, it doesn't feel overwrought. It wasn't, oh, this is so obvious. Almost I feel sometimes in literature, it's spot the Eve character, spot the Christ figure. It doesn't feel like that, but it's hard to miss it too when you think about it.
So some Latter-day Saints have compared it to the faith's plan of salvation laid out in their temples. What do you think?
Again, my first time through, I was just I'm really enjoying this, but yes, this message of leaving innocence, of going through the wilderness of human experience and maturing all along the way, it's all there. One friend of mine mentioned that as soon as she got out of it, she was moved to tears, and she's like, "This is the temple movie I wish I would have had." And so, this is where the Latter-day Saint take on Eve specifically as wise can especially shine. We really do have this to draw from. It would have been a total tragedy for Eve to have stayed in Eden or for Barbie to stay in Barbieland.
So, spoiler, in the end, Ken says there is no Ken. There's only Ken and Barbie. And alluding to something you said earlier, the Bible talks about Eve being created as a, quote, helpmeet to Adam. But in this case, Ken is created as a helpmeet or an accessory to Barbie. What did you think about in the end when he says that Ken's need to discover his true self apart from Barbie?
Yeah, I have two thoughts. The first, and it's just such a great question, but this really resonates for me personally, very strongly. My my first book was a memoir called East Winds. And it basically was a big wrestle with my deep ambivalence and fear about marriage because I didn't want to be I didn't want to be and Rachel. The tagline was Mormon, married, mother, the end. So I was so ruled by fear and haunted by my relationship status. And in so many ways, so was Ken. Barbie, in contrast, she's got Ken and she's got the Barbie. She's not weighed down worrying about it at all. She's just going about her little Barbie life. It's not so little at all, as it turns out. But on the flip side, and another friend of mine and I am noticing how many times I keep saying like a friend of mine. These are all different friends. Everyone is going to see this movie and talking about it. Anyway, but this other friend of mine, she's a brilliant scholar. She really felt that this movie actually fell very flat in its feminism. So, I want to honor that spectrum too. She enjoyed the film as a comedy, but thought that Gerwig's kind of like, just go find yourself, interpretation of what women need to do is hard to actually go and do that in a society structured entirely around the fact that we are all subjects being acted upon by these larger structures and systems that profit off of the same dynamic. So, there might be a limit to what we can do as just self-actualized people or women in this case. But I think this is a really good start to a really important conversation.
So continuing with Ken needs to be, more fully realized, not just an attachment or an accessory to Barbie. Isn't that what Latter-day Saint women kind of want too? They don't want to just be an accessory. That's sort of what you're talking about, right? And what that one blog talked about. Yeah,
I cannot speak for all women, thank goodness. But for me, yes. I've just seen such a wide responses from LDS women. And I think that response shows just like a larger portrait of like, we've got a really complex thing going on with how women are relating to gender and roles and patriarchy, and also understanding of those concepts. It's really not very didactic once you get down to it. And I've been just very surprised by the range of responses from so many people.
So in the movie, when Ken arrives in the real world, he's just surprised and struck by all the things men can do that they couldn't do in Barbieland. And he thinks he can do anything just by being male. I can be a doctor. I'm a man. I don't have to go to school or anything. I can just be something. And the LDS Church has an all-male priesthood, which allows boys and men to be deciders over women in almost all cases. What did you think about the parallels?
Ryan Gosling does such a fantastic job portraying Ken. I think most people can agree on that. And I also want to add, especially for this podcast, let's also not forget that he grew up Mormon.
Yeah, he did.
Because his acting is so over the top, it's easier to spot and laugh at. Of course, Ken, with no medical experience, shouldn't be able to walk into a hospital and perform surgery. Of course, men without experience shouldn't be charged. Of course, that's dangerous, especially when making decisions for women. And then it's like, oh. So I think this parallel to the LDS Church definitely doesn't feel comedic to me when I actually sit down to think about it. I've definitely been in situations at church where I haven't felt less than my male counterparts, but I've also been especially recently, had an incident that was so deeply painful that not going to say on a podcast, and this is coming from a memoirist, and I just bear it all. But so deeply wounded by men acting out the hierarchy. And I think that happens especially when there's a tension, when there's a problem. It's all fun and games when we're all playing nice at the beach. But then when, actually there's a difference or there's something that needs to be attended to, it's the patriarchy, I think, shows some of its worst at that moment, or at least it did for me. And so I think, it's one of the most powerless, alienating feelings that I've ever felt. And for me, a really poignant part of the movie was when Ken is asked for the first time, what time is it from someone on the street? And he startles and he's like, you respect me. And he's just floored. And I think and that is part of Ken's just like larger journey, like good luck, Ken. But I think everyone, regardless of who they are and how they identify in terms of their gender, I think like deserves respect. And that's just like something that Ken was just like, oh my gosh, what is this? What is respect? That's something I'm thinking about.
Well, one more point on that. I mean, at some level, and this is taking it obviously to the extreme, but a 12-year-old boy with the priesthood has more power to act in God's name than adult women. And just by being male, I mean, when you reduce it down to that, it does seem kind of absurd.
It does. Again, I'm seeing Ken walking into the hospital saying like, I'd like to perform a surgery now. Yeah, it's again, I'm thinking back to Abby's blog post of like, being like, oh, if this happened at a hospital or if this happened at school, I would be outraged or this would be really strange. But I think we have some special blinders that come into play when we're talking about our religious experience.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit now, Rachel, and ask about, because the movie targets perfectionism. Latter-day Saints and even their scripture, be ye therefore perfect, essentially embrace that as a quest, maybe an eternal quest, but a quest nonetheless. What message can members, especially women, take from the movie about perfectionism?
Yeah, I think, part of Barbie leaving Barbieland is she's being exiled, not just from innocence. I think there was a Christianity Today post that talked about this, but exiled from perfectionism. And I think the idea, the concept of innocence and perfectionism together are interesting. I think we have a tendency to fetishize both, as if those are somehow good. But again, like there was no way that Barbie could ever get past the best day, quote unquote, ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever, without doing something different, without becoming imperfect. And so that's something I thought a lot about and want to keep thinking about. But yeah, I think we've got to get past that, not just in the literal translation. That's more of like actually like mature is the better translation of that word, be therefore perfect. But seeing it like not as an ideal, but actually something deeply plastic, as something that we actually really want to not be. Like, let's be human. Do
you think this is a bigger issue for Latter-day Saint women than men?
Oh, it's hard to say. I think it's a spectrum. I think it's so spectrum. But I mean, again, I can just speak to my own life. Yes. Yes, I'm like, I don't know anyone else here. I'm like, no more notes. I'm just like, yes.
So you talked about feminist critiques of the movie, but lots of conservative critics have said the film is anti-men. And what do you think about that? Is it anti-men or is it just anti-patriarchy?
I think it's a movie about Barbie and it's a comedy, so this happens too. And I know this so well as a writer, like people read their own experience. Like people don't read your book, they read their story. And so I can see where, some of these criticisms are coming from. To some extent, I also like America Ferrera's husband in the movie was like particularly like a total airhead prop. But again, it's comedy and I don't think the movie is particularly subversive. That's my own take. But the movies can't and is not supposed to do everything. I saw a really interesting take on Twitter, which I'm still not calling X, that said something to the effect of, did it make you feel uncomfortable to see Ken and men portrayed that way as an accessory and merely a love interest? Then good. You're on your way to realizing something. Like, just keep going like a little bit further. And I'm not sure that the movie really says anything conclusive or even directional about how we all live together. It's really not conclusive. It's also like not as dark. I'm thinking about the novel by Naomi Alderman, The Power, where it's just like women suddenly get this power to like electrocute men, and so they suddenly have like physical domination in the world. And yeah, that's there's annihilation themes, so we don't quite go there in Barbie, but But it's also very open-ended, I think. I don't think it quite answers what we do next.
So another message is no adult woman wants to live in Barbieland or in patriarchy. Even Barbie wants to be a, quote, creator and live in the real world. How does that jive with Latter-day Saint teachings and Latter-day Saint women?
I think we have a long way to go in our culture where some women do benefit and enjoy living in patriarchy. I also think we need to acknowledge that the quote unquote real world can be really, really terrible. Near the end, when Barbie sees a montage of a lot of, quote unquote real women, they are smiling, they are laughing, they are living their best moments. And, by embracing, the human experience, Barbie will know the good like she will in the case of Eve. But wow, will she also know the bad, like realities like war, school shootings, sexual assault, climate crisis, cancer, grief upon grief upon grief. There's a reason. And maybe as a collective culture, again, this kind of fetishizing of innocence, I think that we actually take solace in the innocence of Eden. There's a reason why even Barbie wanted to pick the pink high heel over the Birkenstock sandal. Like knowledge is really painful. And so, yeah, it just, for me, it goes back to the opposition in all things idea. I just think we have a lot of work to do about our obsession with innocence. In grad school, I went to grad school in New York, and I worked with a really amazing essayist named Philip Lopate. And what was really refreshing about him is he just had like little interest in our writings about innocence. He was so bored by our essays about nostalgia and childhood. And he's just like, bring your full brain. Like, what was so great about that time? And so in his classes, I started to interrogate that idea of innocence for myself. What was so important about upholding, like I had this subconscious small, like, oh, I'm a nice Utah Mormon girl. I'm out of my depth here in the big, big city, like embarrassing narrative. And it's like, what's really so, like, what even is innocence? What is this? Remaining willfully ignorant has terrible consequences, as we see time and time again. Do we valorize it in the church? I think turning away from cognitive dissonance because it makes us feel bad is not the right move. And so, yeah, I guess the question I'm just asking, and I think that this movie speaks to, is like, why this longing to go back rather than the grappling with the difficult here and now? And again, I think this, connects to that idea of perfectionism. Like, can we move away from innocence? Can we move away from perfectionism to something better, something deeper and richer?
So what do you think about the ending?
I feel complicated. I think I want to see it again. So no, jury's out. I want to see it again because I was so deeply moved. Are we talking about the last line or like her choice? To be clear,
her choice.
Her choice, yeah, deeply moved. And again, I think, and maybe it's my Mormon DNA, this like Eve thing of just like, you go, Barbie. I also think, like, I wonder what that scene with that montage would have looked like with some more, I guess, some of the bad experiences of this lone in her wilderness. Did Eve fully know what she was consenting to? Yeah. Like really the choice between the high heel and that nasty sandal. It's a difficult choice, actually.
Although the last line is certainly, as you say, also worthy of pondering, right?
Yeah.
So,
I love that. Yeah. I love that. It was actually in a Relief Society lesson in Cambridge the first time someone gave me a compact mirror and was like, love your body. A pink compact mirror. So, yeah, welcome to it all.
So final question, final takeaways. And what do you think Latter-day Saints should or could take away from it? Again, you can't speak for all of them, but in general,
yes.
What are the messages that could resonate?
Yeah, I think regardless of individual interpretations, my opinion, someone, you listening's opinion, I think that the movie is a very important conversation starter. I think people watching it with their kids and the kids ask on the drive home, like, Mom, what's patriarchy? I think that's absolutely brilliant. in kind of the range of people I see and how they feel about patriarchy, whether I think that's like a really good thing or not, like whatever that is, whatever feelings people have about the patriarchy, we need to know what patriarchy is and that the church is structured this way. I've often heard like people kind of dismissively say like, well, the church isn't a patriarchy. And that's just actually just naive. Like you might feel a certain way about patriarchy, but yeah, like that's Eden thinking. And so I didn't really understand what patriarchy meant until I was in my 20s, like in a real concrete way. You know, again, for our blogger, Abby Maxwell Hansen, you know, that was 32. I know many people, many women for whom it was much older than that. But I think by having these conversation starters, like if it made someone feel uncomfortable, talk. If it like felt really validating some way, like talk, because, you know, it's just a movie about Barbie. And again, we read our own story. And so I guess like engage, like take one more step, take another step to wherever that might lead. And then last, you know, as a writer, this is something I'm thinking about a lot, is I'm really thinking about the power of thoughtful humor. I touched on a lot of these themes in my recent memoir, and I've read countless gutting stories from women about how small they have felt or abused in certain situations. And that absolutely has an effect, like no doubt, you know, to do that. But this over the top humor thing, you know, I'm thinking of Katie's blog post, you know, that seems to be a productive portal into this conversation that I hadn't particularly considered. You know, and that's really what Barbie, like this is a comedy. And that's surprising to me. So that's something I want to think more about. Yeah, I think, and, you know, speaking to the end again, you know, it's like, you do you, like, that's maybe all we can do for now until we have some larger systemic, you know, solutions. But we also can like do us together, you know, and by having these conversations, we're at least less alienated and alone in that way.
Rachel Rucker, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you again. So fun to talk. Thanks for having me.
And thanks to Dave Noyce.
Always a pleasure.
And to our producer, Nicole Weaver. We remind our listeners that they can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormonland newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com to sign up, and we'll talk again next time on Mormonland.